I was really nervous for this, and now I'm really excited seeing all your faces. So thank you, Ahla wa sahla. We're going to go ahead and get started with our program, and then hand it off to Erakat.
Hi everyone, thank you again for joining us tonight. This is our first ever in-person event for the Palestinian Feminist Collective. My name is Dina, and we would like to warmly welcome you to our first event titled Field of Poppies, Rituals of Loss and Survival.
So I'm just going to introduce the Palestinian Feminist Collective. Show your hands. Who's heard of PFC before?
I have.
Nice. Okay. So the Palestinian Feminist Collective is a body of Palestinian and Arab feminists, primarily located here on Turtle Island, on the unceded lands known as North America. We are an intergenerational collective of activists, organizers, practitioners, creators, thinkers, artists, scholars, healers, water and land protectors, life givers, and life sustainers. We are committed to achieving Palestinian social and political liberation by confronting systemic gendered, sexual, and colonial violence, oppression, and dispossession. Through an anti-colonial approach, we center the political urgency of the Palestinian struggle. We resist the normalization of Zionist violence, oppression, and hegemony in all aspects of public and private life, including within feminist spaces. Our decolonial work centers a set of life-affirming principles and practice to redefine movement cultures that are rooted in transformative justice, healing, and creation. We are inspired by and borrow from past and present Palestinian, Arab, Black, Indigenous, and Third World feminist movements through practice. We advance Palestinian feminism as a liberatory philosophy and practice necessary to create the world we want to live in. So, Palestinian Feminist Collective, we've only been around for about 2 years now. We started in the pandemic, and we've all been meeting on Zoom for the past 2 years. And we're national and even international. And so it's been quite a journey to get here. A lot of us come from organizing spaces of people that are within the organizing, like the co-sponsors from the event tonight. We come from all different backgrounds. I think the most beautiful thing about our collective is that it truly is intergenerational. I'm working with people of all different walks of life and all different backgrounds that I would have never worked in before. And so in order for you to learn more about PFC, you can also go onto our website, PalestinianFeministCollective.org. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You could also just, hit me up or anybody else in this room. And so I wanted to introduce the calendar to you all. So this calendar has been a labor of love. This is the calendar that we've worked on. It's called the Palestinian Feminist Futures Calendar. Here, can you hold it? So when we envisioned what our project was going to be, we wanted to envision something that would create our Palestinian feminist future, and we wanted to also envision how we would restore and how our collective histories would look like, and what a practice would be where we would bridge Palestinians in the homeland and those in the global Shittat. And we also wanted something that we would envision a Palestinian feminist future towards power, love, land, life, freedom, dignity, and all of that. And so we came up with this project, this calendar, which this calendar has 13 principles. So for each month of the year, the calendar has principles that we all worked on, and the principles are our guiding principles as the PFC. So this is our political rhetoric. This is what we're putting out in the world. We all worked really close together to figure out what we wanted to say. How did we want to frame a martyrs event? How did we want to frame prisoners? How did we want to frame the intifada? Like, these are all very crucial points into the Palestinian dimension that we wanted to come together and be able to put together in a project. And so each month we present some kind of event, some kind of online thing. This is the second event. The first event was last month for Intifada, and this month was for Martyrs' Day. And so Martyrs' Day is actually on January 7th every year. And so this is to commemorate the anniversary of Palestinian martyrs. And we also want to give a huge shout out and thank you to all of our sponsors, the Palestinian Youth Movement, the Middle East Children's Alliance, Students for Justice in Palestine at Cal Law, Bears for Palestine, Critical Resistance, and Palestinian Public Health. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Randa.
So today, as Maysa mentioned, our event is in commemoration and honor of all the Palestinian martyrs who are the heartbeat of our liberation movement. It's quite fitting, unfortunately, that we have this event at the beginning of the year on the heels of what's been called the deadliest year in recent Palestinian history, with at least 226 Palestinians executed in 2022. Naming last year as the deadliest year for Palestine excludes the mass murder missions in Gaza in 2021, 2014, and 2009, when thousands of Palestinians were murdered en masse by aerial bombings and ground invasions in Gaza, entire family lineages wiped out, and infrastructures destroyed beyond rehabilitation. Therefore, we hold this event to also grieve all of those who died during the ongoing siege and blockade of Gaza, which has made Gaza an open-air prison. And now we're only 19 days into the new year, and Israel has already killed 16 Palestinians, almost a daily execution of Palestinians since the start of 2023. The possibility of death looms over the daily lives of Palestinians that even children, like 15-year-old Adam Ayyad, was carrying his will in his pocket when he was going around and going to school in the fear of being killed. It was the first week of January, and Adam was shot in the chest during a raid on Tesha refugee camp, and his body left to bleed out by the Israeli military as they continued the arrest campaign. I'm not sure if any of you saw the numerous videos and photos of his family grieving, his parents grieving, and carrying his tiny corpse for burial. But this is painfully what so many of our families are enduring for continuing to live and have samud in Palestine under the Israeli regime. So in his will, Adam wrote, "I wish I could do a lot of things, but we are in a country where it's impossible to achieve your dreams. My friends and my loved ones, do not forget me and do not leave my mother alone. I wish that people would think and wake up to realize that we are under a Zionist occupation. I wish for the coming generations that freedom will be in their grasp." Even this child in his will is articulating the dreams of freedom, knowing that these words will only be read if he is dead, and this movement must continue on beyond him. Yet, to speak about Palestinian martyrs is to speak about a part of our society that has been criminalized on a global scale. On the one hand, Western media and governments portray our anti-colonial struggle as one that is bloodthirsty. They say that our mothers send their sons to die. They call us terrorists. They tell us that our lives are worth less than any other human life. On the other hand, those who are sympathetic to our cause look at the Palestinian death toll and they pity us. They ignore our dreams for freedom by promoting solutions that fall short of our liberatory demands and the right of return, only reinforcing the status quo and Israeli control and seizure of Palestinian land and life. So today, our event program is meant to break out of those paradigms and center our martyrs' lives and the Palestinian will for freedom. We want to honor each of our martyrs and remind our communities and the world that our dead are not just numbers or statistics or death counts, but our dead have names, families, children, brothers, siblings, sisters, hopes, aspirations, and dreams that were all cut short by the racist Israeli settler colonial regime. As Maysa mentioned, our program today is part of the Palestinian Feminist Collective's Feminist Futures Project. Early last year, we all came together and we asked ourselves, what does it mean to envision a Palestinian feminist future? Through that question, we worked together and wrote collectively a series of 13 principles that guide our work and ground our anti-colonial and life-affirming vision and practice, which you can read all about in our calendar and on our website as well. So I want to pass it along to Mesa to read our principle that we wrote for this month for Martyrs' Day.
So, I mentioned that this was a labor of love, and as you can imagine, when you bring together a bunch of really smart people and scholars and activists, things kind of get a little challenging along the way as we're trying to develop our principles. So it was really something that we had been working through from the start of doing this calendar and in our approach to doing this principle in particular. So the people that put this principle together was myself and Randa and Dina and Noura. And so we kind of divided each of the principles between different members of the PFC. And so the principle is as follows. We honor the sacred relationship between the living and the dead, and our rights to mourn in the tradition of our ancestors. We recognize that life is systematically taken from us by design of the cruel order of racist colonialism. We hold one another in the practice of collective mourning and remembrance of our martyrs. We demand the right to bury our dead with dignity, to grieve their souls, and the rights of martyrs to rest in the earth of their homeland free and in peace. Their lives, legacies, and everlasting contributions will continue to inspire our struggle for liberation. In preparing for this event, it was very emotional. It's really hard to see every day, another shaheed, another story, another young person, somebody from your village, a family member, a cousin, an uncle. This is stuff that we go through every day. And so I'm really happy and proud of us for being able to come here today and to commemorate our martyrs and to hold true to their legacies. For this month, the photo that we have featured is actually a photo by a martyr herself. Her name is Dina al-Omar. Dina al-Omar was a 22-year-old artist and college student from the city of Khan Yunis who was martyred by Israeli forces on Friday, August 5th, 2022. Al-Omar studied visual arts of Gaza's Al-Aqsa University. She once wrote about her work on her Facebook page, "I'm not making anything amazing. I'm merely trying amidst this isolation to make life bearable." And so when we were trying to figure out all of our artists for the calendar, we were really trying to find artists that are really not that well known and artists that are in the diaspora. And so when we came across Dina, we had just found out that she had just been martyred. And so it took a while to figure out how can we get permission? Are we able to get permission? Somehow we were able to connect to her family, and her family was honored to have her piece be a part of our calendar. And so we were able to have it featured in our calendar.
So today, for the remainder of our program, we want to honor our martyrs by bringing together some of the most critical feminist voices to speak about the very complicated feelings of death, loss, grieving, while also recognizing the sacrifice and heartbreak that our people endure on the ongoing quest for liberation. So the centerpiece of our event today will be a conversation between Noura Erakat and Dina Omar, who will talk about the role of women in mourning rituals, as well as the legal restrictions related to inhibiting us from mourning with dignity. So we brought both of these speakers, who are members of the Palestinian Feminist Collective, together because of their work on Palestinian death, Noura from a legal perspective and Dina from an anthropological one. But like so many of us who have martyrs in our families, this event today is very personal for them. Noura is the cousin of Ahmed Erakat, who was killed at the container checkpoint in Bethlehem in June 2022. And Dina's relative in Ramoun, Ahmed Kahle, was gunned down in his car in Silwad just earlier this week while his son was in the car with him. We want to honor both Ahmed and say Allah yarhamhum as we continue on with this program. Both of them were killed at Israeli checkpoints and then accused of attempting to attack the soldiers, even though they were in their vehicle, in order to justify their murders and for the soldiers to evade accountability. Israeli soldiers are brazenly murdering Palestinians with impunity, both from within their own society and government and also from the international community. And that has emboldened them to use this shoot to kill policy, to quell Palestinian rebellion, and to continue to criminalize us in life and death. Not only that, this shoot-to-kill policy is coupled with one of the most inhumane practices that Israelis have inflicted upon Palestinians, and that is to hold hostage the corpses and the bodies of Palestinians they kill as a punitive measure. They deny them their final burial rights and the right of dignity in death. Ahmed Erakat, Noura's cousin, is one of nearly 300 Palestinians whose bodies are being held in this state of post-mortem captivity, and hopefully she will discuss a little bit more details of what their family has endured today. So this policy to hold the bodies and withhold the bodies of Palestinians has actually reemerged as a punitive measure in this most recent wave of Palestinian rebellion since 2015. But it actually dates back to the 1960s, to the Palestinian Thawra, when Israel would take the bodies of the Fidaiyin who were working to struggle to liberate Palestine and put them in undisclosed mass graves that were marked only by number. And these have come to be called Maqabir al-Arqam, the cemeteries of numbers by Palestinians, for the fact that they just are all marked by a number. So today, joining us via audio recording is Badur Hassan, who is a writer and journalist and researcher based in Jerusalem, who's going to talk about this policy and talk about a little bit of what she researched for her most recent report called Warmth of Our Sons, which you can find online. She works with the campaign to release these bodies. So we're going to hear from her first today. To kind of ground this event and what is going on over there.
بدنا أولادنا. We want our children. I just want to know whether my son is dead or alive. There is no confirmation, no funeral, nobody to mourn, nobody to hug, nothing that proves that I lost my son. These are statements repeated by mothers, fathers, loved ones of Palestinian martyrs who were killed by Israeli occupation forces and whose bodies remain buried either in cemeteries of numbers or in Israeli morgues. For the past few decades, actually since 1967, Israel has been practicing systematically the policy of withholding Palestinian martyrs' bodies. It used this policy for several purposes. First, it was against the bodies of Palestinian fighters who dared enter their occupied land in order to fight Israeli soldiers, and they were assassinated or killed, and their bodies were dumped or thrown in mass graves, and their loved ones never heard of them again. During the 1990s, especially during the late 1980s, during the first Intifada, Israel used this policy commonly to prevent the eruption of funerals. So often, Palestinian funerals would turn into mass expressions of anger, of revolt, of unification. And in order to ban this gathering, in order to ban this public expression of grief and pain turned into anger, Israel would withhold the body and justify it on the grounds of national security. Later, Palestinian bodies would be held, and this would be justified to use these bodies as bargaining chips, either to return and negotiate the return of Israeli soldiers held by Palestinian resistance groups, or in order to put pressure on Palestinians and their families. It was not until 2015 that this policy began to take some sort of regulation. Rather, in 2017, the Israeli cabinet enacted a policy that gave it the legitimacy to withhold the bodies of Palestinian martyrs who are affiliated with Hamas, or whose body could be used as bargaining chips to pressure Hamas into negotiating the release of the bodies of 2 Israeli soldiers held in Gaza since 2014. Israel has held hundreds of Palestinian martyrs' bodies in mass graves, so-called cemeteries of numbers, where Palestinian bodies are held without any identification or documentation, denied the most basic rights of dignified burial. In addition to that, more than 120 bodies of Palestinian martyrs have been held since 2016 in order to be used as bargaining chips with Hamas, including martyrs who are not affiliated with Hamas, which was enacted in an expansion of the cabinet policy decision. And so often the Israeli court, the Israeli Supreme Court, so-called High Court of Injustice, actually, would justify and legitimize this policy and granted a stamp of legitimacy. In fact, it was the Israeli High Court's decision in 2019 that justified this policy, which is based on a British emergency regulation dating back to 1945. Yes, it is a British emergency regulation that gives Israel the authority to withhold Palestinian martyrs' body, just like it is a British emergency regulation that gives Israel the authority to demolish Palestinian homes as an act of punishment, as an act of revenge, as an act of vengeance against the entire Palestinian community. It is also a British emergency regulation that gives Israel the authority to detain Palestinians without charges or trial for prolonged period. And also it is a British emergency regulation that authorizes Israel to close the offices of Palestinian civil society organization. You see, these British emergency regulations, the tenets of Israel's military regime in the West Bank, continue to be practiced by Israel. They were practiced first in Palestine 48, just after 1948, and after the establishment of Israel. And they continue to be used in the areas occupied in 1967, in the West Bank, in all areas of the West Bank, and in areas in the Gaza Strip. In addition to restricting the right of Palestinians to bury their loved ones, which we can term as necropolitics or necroviolence, because it's a form of violence exerted on the dead and using the dead in order to punish the living, Israel also restricts the ability of Palestinians to mourn their loved ones by imposing strict and insulting and demeaning conditions on their funerals, by determining in its counter-terrorism law that only a limited number of people are allowed to attend the funerals of Palestinians whom Israel accuses of trying to carry out an attack against its soldiers or its settlers. This counter-terrorism law also prevents Palestinians from carrying flags during funerals. Israel is well aware of the power that the dead body enshrines. It's well aware of the strength that can be mobilized when Palestinians march in funerals. And this was really clear and vivid during the funeral of Palestinian martyr and journalist Shireen Abu Akleh when Israel attacked its coffin. Many people were surprised, but it's not a surprise. Perhaps the attack on Shireen's funeral was a public act so explicit, so painful, so brutal. But these brutal and repeated brutal attacks against the Palestinian dead, against their funerals, continue to be perpetrated by Israel for decades. It's just that people choose not to look. And this is the message of Palestinian families fighting to reclaim the bodies of their loved ones. They're saying that these bodies are dear to us. It is our right to mourn. It's our right to march in funerals together with all the Palestinian people. It's our right to call for the dignity of our sons and daughters and loved ones, because the dignity of the dead cannot be separated from the dignity of the living.
And with that, I would like to introduce our first two speakers, Dina Omar and Noura Erakat. Of course, they need no introduction, but I'm going to try anyways. Maybe you guys can put 2 chairs there. So Dina Omar is a PhD candidate at Yale University pursuing a joint degree in anthropology and gender, women, and sexuality studies. She's a founding member of National Students for Justice in Palestine, and prior to that, she was a member of SJP here at UC Berkeley and was one of the architects of the first divestment bill in 2010. Dina is also a member of the Palestinian Feminist Collective in our local Bay Area chapter and a co-owner of the Palestinian Soap Store in Berkeley. Noura Erakat, where do we begin with your bio? Is an associate professor in Africana Studies in the program in criminal justice at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. She's here with us all the way from Philly, flying in this morning. Thank you so much, Noura. And is also a Bay Area native, which makes this event particularly special, and a graduate of UC Berkeley for both undergraduate and law school, as well as a member of the Palestinian Feminist Collective, coming from the East Coast. As well, you might have read her book. If not, I recommend you pick it up, Justice for Some, Law and the Question of Palestine, which was published in 2019. So with that, I will hand over the mic to you guys.
Thank you all for coming. The turnout is much larger than we expected, and we're so happy that everybody showed up, which is funny because it's definitely a part of Palestinian mourning practices to show up and be together. So Noura and I thought that we could just be in conversation with one another and talk about what we know about this subject. So did you want to?
Sure. First, I also want to echo Dina's welcome to everybody, our gratitude for you being here, especially because the topic that we're broaching on today is one that has not only been created as a taboo, but in many ways has been criminalized. For us to say glory to our martyrs is to stand in the face of an incredible amount of power that wants to say that us saying that is kin to us transgressing on the humane. And so I want to affirm very loudly, glory to our martyrs, to all of our martyrs. May they rest in peace and power, and may we vindicate the cruelty of the deprivation of their life. So thank you for sharing with us in that. One of you all might be familiar, if you're not Palestinian, but have observed the ways that Palestinians mourn. It's quite unique in the way that we come together. Oftentimes we'll hear mothers ululating, women being incredibly steadfast. The marches that take place, as Randa and Mesa articulately, showed to us, these are moments of political mobilization, not only of mourning, but of reaffirming our commitment to life, our commitment to survival. And so I want to start by asking Dina to set for us a bit of that context of what are these rituals of loss and mourning, and what are the particular roles of women that we've seen that continue to sustain these practices?
So considering this is a PFC event, we want to highlight the role of women, obviously in mourning practices, but also to decenter it, because I think women oftentimes represent kinship, but we also want to consider men and everybody on the spectrum and their role in kinship practices, or the way we constitute kinship. And I think just having grown up around a huge community, when we think about who are we and how do we decide not decide, but how our comportment, our dispositions, our tastes, our understandings of who we are very much social. And so when Noura and I were sort of going back and forth about what we wanted to ask, there was this poem by Mus'ab Abu Toha which came to mind, and it's called Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear. And I don't know about you, but like growing up, I don't know how many Palestinians there are, but there was always an uncle, a father, somebody who would be like, I got your ear, and then they would have a piece of candy in your ear, right? How do you learn these things, if not kinship, if not socially, if not by the people that your body is literally in proximity to? And so he wrote, when you open my ear, touch it gently. My mother's voice lingers somewhere inside. Her voice is the echo that helps recover my equilibrium when I feel dizzy during my attentiveness, right? And so our proximity to other people is what allows us to understand what's appropriate, what's grief, how do we grieve, how loud should a wail be, how quiet should it be. And that's why, Palestinian mourning practices are very different than, British mourning practices, or, it all has to do very much with geography. And so I just wanted to sort of put that out there. And I think what's very interesting also about the Palestinian context of people who've been systematically dispossessed of their possessions, of their land, uprooted, is to take seriously the ways in which Palestinian communities have stayed together despite their diasporic existence. So for me, I learned how to be a person from my mother, from my grandmother, from all of the uncles, aunts, cousins around me. And they're the ones who taught me rites of passage and like the rituals that we conduct and go through during those moments. And when you're, and at this point, it's very much under siege. So I guess what I think the Palestinian Feminist Collective, what we're doing, we're not just trying to highlight the role of women per se, right? But I think there's a Palestinian historian at UC Santa Barbara, Shireen Saikali, in one of her books. She talks about the role of, she calls women of thrift. And she asks us to focus our lens on home economics, about how people dwell in their homes, how they serve guests, the ways that they, just constitute and build home and build community. And in that, I would say she's also asking us to think about not just women, but this lens as a lens through which to understand both political agency and economic agency, right? So they're not just passive, docile victims, women, right? But they're actors in our sort of national identity. And they're also in this space, in the home, in homes next to other homes. During rites of passage like funerals, I would say, like, they're probably some of the most formative memories you'll ever have. If anybody's ever been to a funeral, in Palestinian society, there's very much this trope of like the woman ripping her thobe or wailing very loud, and also that procession or that, and also being together and performing that grief to other people in your community is not just a way of relating to one another, but it's a way of saying this person is exalted in our eyes. They belong to us. There's this saying like, minna wa fina, they are of us and from us, right? And there's not, like Randa had mentioned a martyr from Dehesha. It's also very localized, right? So every village has a kind of variation of the same kind. So there's no way that you can't locate on a kinship chart, even if that person is from Dehesha but lives in Berkeley like Ziad, he would be able to tell you exactly who that person is, exactly who their mother and father are, exactly who their children are. And like, it's something about constituting belonging and ways to be together, and also like, how to gauge what appropriate grief is. And so with that, I just wanted to ask you that Noura's, as Randa had mentioned earlier, his family had suffered a profound loss with the death of, or the martyrdom of Ahmad Erakat, who, when right when he passed away, you were on the news and you were principally using the word martyr over and over again. And I remember that, just that being very intentional. And you made it a point to also go and pay your respects in line with Palestinian tradition, actually physically going to Palestine and visiting your family and paying your respects in that manner. And your family has not been able to bury Ahmed, Allah yarhamu, because as Badur and Randa had said, his body is being held captive. So can you tell us a little bit about this incident, about visiting your family, but also how you as a lawyer are sort of trying to understand all of this and grappling with it?
Yeah, no. Thank you, Dina. Can I just add one thing to what you were saying, which is our role also in the PFC, and something that Lubna Qattami, Dr. Lubna Qattami, highlighted to me recently in our conversation. Oftentimes we tend to think of resistance in the form of militarism. And so, especially in militarized confrontations, more so in the since this, it's known as the Second Intifada or the Al-Aqsa Intifada, where clashes become, localized to the perimeter on these now localized, different jurisdictional areas of A, B, C that didn't exist before Oslo, right? That these are the inventions of the peace process. The very things that we're protesting are the inventions of the peace process. Well, so much of those confrontations begin to take place on those jurisdictional lines, and no longer are soldiers, for example, invading homes as they had previously. Also because it becomes militarized after the U.S. Lightly arms Palestinians in order to police themselves, to protect Israelis. Those arms are turned against Israelis, and now the confrontations, this is what I mean by increasing militarization. Well, that happens to the exclusion of a broader popular base, including women, right, who aren't necessarily at that forefront. And one of the things that the PFC reminds us is that those who are actually taking up arms and are resisting in that way, yes, they're resisting, but they're not the primary form of resistance. Right? The primary form of resistance is actually our survival. It's what, the primary kernel of it is our willingness to continue and remain steadfast in sumud. And how do we practice that sumud? That is very much something that women are leading us in as they hold families together, who can both mourn, be in despair, but not lose hope. And so these are the practices of resistance that the PFC is also centering. And I bore witness to it firsthand as I, witnessed my own family endure this. So for those who are not familiar, my cousin Iman was getting married on June 23rd, 2019. Nasi completely, I'm sorry. It's a complete blur. We were more concerned with the wedding, but instead, I remember seeing on social media everywhere this image of a young man being shot down 6 times above the waist in 2 seconds and wilting like a flower onto the asphalt and then being left out to bleed. Being left out to bleed as a queue of Palestinian cars who are lined up again at this checkpoint between Abu Dis and Bethlehem are videotaping. They're in the car. There's tens and dozens of Palestinians who can help him, but they can't get out of their car to help him because if they so much as move, they too will be shot dead, right? So it's also this enforced helplessness. And they're praying from their cars over the body of Ahmed. This was my cousin who was taking a car that he had rented, a Hyundai, from Abu Dis to Bethlehem to decorate it for his sister's wedding. And it malfunctioned at this infamous checkpoint known as the Container, veers into a kiosk, there's 4 officers, hits one of them lightly. She falls and gets right back up. That's how light the contact was. And then he's immediately shot dead, called a terrorist, left out to bleed, stripped naked, and has immediately declared a terrorist, and his body has been held captive, and we've been denied the right to bury him. We've been denied the right to bury him. Now, you all probably bore witness to this on your ends of how grotesque that was. Well, from our vantage point, It was infuriating because before we even knew what happened, by the way, his sister didn't know what happened. Her family wanted her to take her first photos from the wedding and then afterwards told her that her brother had been murdered. So there was a commitment to her joy. There was a commitment to capturing her joy on her wedding day before they shared with her what was happening within in their own grief. And the wedding actually continued that day. I mean, there's a lot of difficulty in comprehending that. But the mother insisted. The mother insisted that they took my son, they will not take this as well. The thing that I was saying about on the inside, I was on social media, of course. It was a deluge of immediate attacks on me and my family for harboring a terrorist, for being a terrorist, for being anti-Semitic. We didn't even have a moment to breathe, to catch our breaths and see to have that moment to mourn before we were put in a position where we had to defend ourselves. You know, this moment we're killed and we have to explain why we didn't harm you, right? There's something incredibly surreal about that, and yet because of these tropes that have been constructed, very racialized tropes of Arab, Muslim, Palestinian, it was very easy for people to understand, so that it made it the onus upon us to refute these accusations rather than to be able to accuse Israel exactly of what it had been doing. And so there was this mayhem that's happening, and I to this day, I'm still a little bit shell-shocked because it happened in front of everybody's eyes, which was another very, I think, traumatic, catastrophic way. You know, not only is there murder, but there's murder that everybody is watching collectively, and there's murder that you're watching this happen, and we're all left to be helpless because we couldn't do anything for Ahmed in that moment, right? The way I throw myself into this, obviously, as I would as an advocate, but certainly as something this close to home, we want Ahmed's body back. And we want to vindicate that this was a malfunction. So I think for at least 6 months, I did nothing else but try to do those things. And that included a petition that we worked on with Al-Haq that was filed to the Human Rights Council, along with an address to 5 special rapporteurs who monitor these things on torture, on racism. We all had them on high alert. This included a petition to the Israeli High Court, which Budur talked about, and when we get to the law part, I'll tell you how the court handled Ahmed's case. So there was an internal petition. There was also the effort of getting a social media campaign because we wanted people to understand. There were op-eds that we were writing. We wanted to capture this moment in order to educate. And one of the things that I personally did, and I have family members here who may have gotten this email. I trained my mother on Zoom how to call her member of Congress, right? But I did this all on Zoom. Hey, Mama, okay, we're gonna walk through this. Now, we're first generation, right? Most Palestinians are here like, let us just survive. Keep your head down low enough to make it through. Maybe the next generation won't be as scathed. So there isn't this feeling of entitlement. Like, I'm an American citizen, damn it. This child should not be in a freezer. So to empower the family, I get my mom to be the first one to basically do the whole thing. She calls her member of Congress on Zoom, and then I share that video with my family residing primarily in California, in Arizona, and in Maryland, where Ahmed's paternal and maternal uncles and aunts live. And we mobilized 6 senators from these 3 states in order to intervene on our behalf, including now Vice President Kamala Harris. It's so effective. Not only are they making the phone calls and we're actually getting in with the State Department, we have one of those senators, Chris Van Hollen, actually write a letter. Now, this might not sound like a big deal to you, but for a senator to create a paper trail accusing Israel of wrongly withholding the body of a Palestinian was a big deal. I mean, we were effective advocates. In response, then Defense Minister Benny Gantz makes the policy even more harsh and says, not only will we not release the body of Ahmed, but now we will dig up other bodies in order to hold them captive as well. And now this, I'll talk about this when I discuss the law, this change of policy is actually incredibly critical because they changed the policy that had been established, a cabinet decision that says that you can withhold bodies if they're a Hamas member or in a case of exceptional terrorism, act of terrorism, and they hold Ahmad's body anyways, even though the court agrees he's neither a member of Hamas nor was this an exceptional act of terrorism. And the last thing that we did is we worked with the Forensic Institute to reconstruct the entire incident frame by frame, using video footage, shadow technology, sounds, eyewitnesses, and we are able to demonstrate that Ahmad was decelerating his car, not accelerating his car. And Dr. Angela Davis narrated this for us in a continuing commitment, this video that you all can look up, an 18-minute video, in a continuing commitment to our interconnected struggles and solidarity. Obviously, this video and all this research that we've done has no impact on getting Ahmad's body back, and I go to visit the family only this year, after 4 years. And the reason I go is because I get an invitation for work that allows me to transgress those racist borders. And I had to wait this long to be able to pay my condolences, which my family hasn't been able, the rest of my family hasn't been able to do. So let me turn with that. Our story is not unique at all, at all. Just as the story of George Floyd, Allah yarhamo, is not unique. Right? None of these stories are unique, but some of them do capture, get greater attention. One of the stories that we know very well that you all might be familiar with is the story of the Qulaq family. 21 members who are living in Gaza, who in May 2021 are all killed in one aerial missile strike. 4 generations. 4 generations are wiped out in one missile strike. Well, they happen to be the relatives of one of our dear friends who also has connections to Berkeley, Hussam al-Khulaq, who had never met his family at all because of our deep fragmentation, enforced fragmentation. And so his dream was to be able to travel to Gaza to meet his family. And now he was in a situation watching 4 generations of his family wiped out and not being able to reach them to mourn. So I want to turn to you, Dina, to tell us a little bit more about Hussam's story.
Yeah, I mean, it's catastrophic and self-explanatory in and of itself. Hussam wasn't the only person in his family to go to Berkeley. There was actually 3 people in his family that went to UC Berkeley. And I think, you know, college campuses in the United States are a very specific terrain where when I started undergrad here, it was taboo to use the word Palestine and to sort of assert certain positions or claims, to say glory to our martyrs out loud, clear, and, you know, it wouldn't have been something that you would hear on a college campus 12 years ago. And so I just think it's very important for, you know, people to think about how Palestinians that live in the United States have to think about themselves as 100% American and 100% Palestinian, and none of this sort of like half thing. And that's why I think, like, listening to Noura and how exhaustive your efforts have been in terms of trying to achieve some sort of restitution. I don't think you can call it restitution, but there's this, like, this stirring that you, like, need to act, because, you know, what would not acting betray? What would not acting mean? And I just would implore people or encourage people to think about, imagine being a student on your college campus, having your dad's brother, his kids' kids, and their kid. And it's funny, in terms of the role of women, I was trying to explain this event to my aunt, and I didn't know what verb to use in that sentence. And she said, istashhadu, right? And so you're taking, it's just such an important concept, because it allows you to explain the gravity of the situation, the depth of what has been lost, while maintaining a certain level of dignity or karama, right? And so, you know, the fact that we are in this cafe, the fact that Noura and I are both Berkeley graduates, the fact that we are connected to this family via this institution, again, are all parts of a kind of social kinship that I think is just important to think about, important to take into account, and also to think about who we're accountable to, what stories we're uplifting. And it really reminds me of a June Jordan poem called Famine, and the last few lines is, and who are we, and how do we defend ourselves as members of what family? And it's, you know, in talking to Hussam al-Kolak and his sister and his brother, and then also in listening to Noura's story about her cousin, and then also just in terms of like I think we're very much shaped by this institution in the sense that we see ourselves as agents, and there's like no stone left unturned, right? I do, like, it's not about like competing for what resources or what methods of resistance are better or worse, or refusal, but just trying to be the most effective as possible in terms of uplifting and mutual aid and mutual respect, and offering that to, you know, the people you're sharing space with. So I mean, one of the main things that I think was very heartbreaking, and we had some of their pictures on the projector, and hopefully we'll be able to see the members of the Al-Kolak family, some of whom who were as old as 89, and one who was as young as 6 months. But one of the difficulties that I saw the family here in the United States struggle with is one of the people who, or the man who was, the one man who wasn't killed in the bombing, who didn't istashhad, he has the deeds of his 2 homes that have been bombed into a parking lot, and he has the death certificate of 22 members of his family. And he has an explanation from Israel saying that it was an accident. And meanwhile, the family here very much has their hands tied in terms of being able to provide any sort of support, any sort of relief to their family in terms of trying to rebuild their homes, trying to get themselves back on their feet because of material witness statutes. There's no person on the planet probably more qualified to talk about the material witness statutes and how they relate to Palestine as Noura. So I want to sort of direct that question towards her. And so I'm asking you if you can put on your academic and your lawyer hat on and tell us a bit more about the ways that Israel has facilitated violence in terms of the material statute, material support in the United States, but also in withholding bodies, as well as extrajudicially executing Palestinians with impunity. And how have these violences been central in a larger sort of question about colonial iterative violence? Small question.
Okay, sign up for the semester. Let me answer this as briefly as possible, okay? And here's the overarching thing. Thank you so much for that, Dina. And here's the overarching thing to emphasize, right? So often we tend to look to the law as the restorative piece that will make us whole again, right? That if politics is ugly and full, you know, and emblematic of unbridled and unchecked power, law is this source where we can, you know, kind of fortify ourselves in order to adjudicate our claims to a fair arbiter. And what I want to emphasize in this question about law is actually the law itself is the violence that's being enacted, right? And the stories what Dina is emphasizing in these 3 bodies of law, right? One is about U.S. criminal law, right? Material support basically prohibits, and Ziad, as the executive director of the Middle East Children's Alliance, can tell us full well about this, prohibits people from sending money casually to their families in Palestine. Because the framework goes that all the money that you might send to somebody in Gaza is relieving them of the burden that they have. Like if you give them money for bread, that makes it less of a burden on Hamas to buy them that bread, which freed up that 50 cents now for Hamas to buy a rocket. So that you can now be federally indicted for material support of terrorism if you happen, and really the case study in the actual case law goes that if you happen to pay for somebody's haircut in Gaza. So that's one piece that you were mentioning. The other body of law that she's referring to is what Budur referred to, which is it's actually the Israeli judiciary, the judicial branch itself that has paved the path for Israel to be able to hold the bodies of Palestinians, right? They're not checking the executive and the legislative, right? They're actually facilitating the process. It wasn't as much located in the courts until 2015 in what's known, there's 3 junctures in the mid-1990s, right? When we see the first, we see the beginning of Oslo and new forms of confrontation in the early 2000s in the Second Intifada, and in 2015 during what we know as the Intifada of individuals, when basically children who were desperate took to makeshift knives and scissors or whatever it was in order to attack soldiers and settlers in Jerusalem. It's at this point that the court steps in to now expand the British emergency regulation, which basically says, if you can't bury a prisoner who dies in captivity, you have the right to hold on to them until you can. Israel has expanded that very narrow emergency regulation to mean you can hold them indefinitely. You can regulate Palestinian funerals, who can attend and at what time they can attend. That you can hold Palestinian bodies as bargaining chips for negotiations. Israel tells us that they want to negotiate for 4 Israelis that are held in Gaza, 2 soldiers, 2 civilians. Already this is a crime against humanity. I don't even have to get into it. But the truth is it's not even about those bargaining. This is really about Israel enforcing and demonstrating that it has all-consuming power and dominance. This is a move in order to disempower and deflate Palestinians, to tell them this is how formidable the obstacle is, right? And that's why actually Lina Abu Akleh, the niece of Shireen, told me that during her aunt's funeral, her greatest fear when the pallbearers were being attacked was that the soldiers were going to kidnap her aunt's body to hold it hostage. There's this anxiety that's bred. But it's the court that did this. And in fact, in the jurisprudence, what's really telling is the president of the court, Esther Hayut, a woman, also demonstrating the fallacy and the shallowness of identity politics, says that this is about, the court needs to enable the country to protect its people, which should immediately trigger for you, she's speaking about a settler people, right? And about a particular national group, a particular racial group. This isn't about protecting Israelis. She's very specific that this is about, we will let the executive and the executive branch do whatever it needs in order to protect Jewish, Zionist settlers. This is what the message was, which is indicative for us how imbricated the courts are. And the last body of law, very similarly, so in that case, the only thing that I'll mention is, for example, we went to court, my family went to court to try to get Ahmed's body back. The case was never, there was no factual, they didn't look at any of the facts. They start the case in the case law. How many lawyers are here? I'm sorry. Or law students? Yeah? They start the case law with saying, Ahmed is a terrorist, we proceed from this basis. So there's never the opportunity to challenge the facts. The only thing that the cases are concerned with is whether or not the state had the authority to hold the body in the first place. And in Ahmed's case, they conclude he didn't have the authority, but that they're going to let the state hold it anyway. And it not only applies to Palestinians who are in the West Bank and Gaza who are considered under occupation, but they expanded this case law to include Palestinian citizens of Israel as well, in withholding their bodies and regulating their funerals. Again, demonstrating the fallacy of the Green Line. Finally, there's an entire body of law. I'm not going to tell you about it. It's awful. But similarly, it basically has expanded Israel's right to kill Palestinians. By shrinking who counts as a Palestinian civilian in the laws of war. And if you're interested in that, we can talk about it later, because I've gone on for too long. I actually want to turn back to you, Dina, because I know part of our conversation was also to connect this to our struggles here that are very proximate and to home. What Palestinians go through is not exceptional. It's actually emblematic, right? It's at one moment incredibly unique, because of how grotesque it is. How is it that we have a settler colony in 2023, right? That's unabashed in its, the expansion of its territorial borders in this way, right? And in its genocidal campaigns, which is not language that we use often, but is language that we should begin to broach, because how else do you describe a settler's relationship to a native population that they're intent on eliminating?
Yeah, I mean, with that, I just want to emphasize, and I think it's a really important point. Another connection that Noura and I have is that we were part of June Jordan's Poetry for the People program here at Berkeley. And the idea of language to me is very interesting and important. It's this very insidious, important, powerful terrain. And so, it might not seem like there's a lot for us to be doing on a regular basis in terms of his Shuhada Palestine, right? But there is something to be said about the violence that we witness, the violences that we allow, the violences that we protest at the level of reading and at the level of speaking and in communicating with one another. And I mean, I think principally that's one of the reasons why I wanted to mention June Jordan's Poetry for the People program, but also mention sort of in your work and in your activism and in your writing, just the fact that you are in an Africana Studies program, how that is very much tied to your commitment, deep, profound commitment to joint struggle. And so while I think both of us, and you in particular, are committed to advancing and discussing the Palestinian narrative, that there is this strong compulsion in your work to not exceptionalize it. So could you maybe we can also open it up for questions about how is it that our experiences with our families and the people that we are accountable to inform our positions on abolition, inform our positions about how we move through the institutions that we're a part of and help run. And I mean that, these institutions are dependent on so much of our labor and so much of our buy-in, right? And so how are we agents in this sort of cosmology? And I feel like, one of the things that I've thought about in terms of your tenure at Rutgers is that it felt like, and we had mentioned this, a movement win. Mm-hmm. And so how do we move in that direction? What are the things that we're sort of thinking about in terms of the violences that we allow at the level of reading, at the level of discourse, but also in a larger political sense? So with that, I think we should maybe, if you all have questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this conversation. energy for the advocacy that you go through?
You're way more energetic than me, girl. I would say, so one thing that I would, I would say is, in preparing for today's discussion, I actually revisited a text about Antigone, and I mean, I don't know if I would consider myself to be like particularly energetic, but I am a reader, and I have a lot of energy to be doing that. And I was just thinking about the decision to act and to, so you have Antigone, she buries her brother, and Creon is like, no, you're not allowed to do that, and I'm gonna hold you captive, and and she does it anyway. And I think that the answer to that question is that you not acting and not having that energy feels like a betrayal of who you are, and so you have to act. So I think that that's how I would answer that question.
I mean, I wasn't going to reference any classics, but in the idea of, yeah, if I tend to wake up feeling like I have no other choice, and it doesn't feel like a burden. It doesn't. It feels like a gift to be able to have that opportunity to be a part of this work that we do. I think the other thing that, being very plain and honest, is that after a while, I learned in my own work that I can't work from a place of guilt, from the privilege that I have, from the access to education, from language. I have a blue passport. I wasn't born somewhere else at another time. You know what I mean? That created a lot of guilt that used to propel me, which was exhausting because I could never do enough. And so and not only can I never do enough, but that only martyrdom of myself would prove my commitment. And it was a shift in the moment when I decided and felt viscerally that I do this work from a place of love. A love for the world, a love for one another, a love for all of our children, a love for our future, and a love for myself. Which means that there's grace. There's grace to myself in the way that I have grace to everyone else, and there's humanity in that. And so that's kind of what sustains me to not burn out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for bearing with us. I'm sorry that it's hard to hear for everybody out in the cafe area. This is such an amazing turnout, and it's really beautiful to see how many people are here tonight. So next, I'm going to introduce my sister, Lubna Marrar. Lubna, she is a poet, she's an activist, she's a beauty maker, she's a creator, she's so many things. And most importantly, she's my best friend, she's my roommate. Lubna is actually going to read off the name of martyrs from the past month. This list is not exhaustive. This list does not go back far enough. This list is only a small representation, but we felt it necessary to uplift their names tonight. And so Lubna will be reading their names.
Hello, everybody. I know that there's a lot of folks in the hallway. I can't see you guys, but thank you, everybody, so much for being here today. So if folks can kind of just stop the chit-chattering a little bit, because this is supposed to be a moment for us to recognize our martyrs. And like Mesa said, this is not an exhaustive list. This is actually very few, and this list starts on January 2nd of 2023. Fuad Muhammad Abid, 17 years old. Muhammad Samir Hushaini, 22 years old. On January 3rd, 2023, Ahmed Isam Ayyad, 15 years old. On January 15th, 2023, Amir Abu Zaytun, 16 years old. On January 11th, 2023, Ahmed Amir Abu Janad, 21 years old. Sanad Muhammad Samara, 19 years old. On January 12, 2023, Habib Muhammad Kamil, 25 years old. Abdul Hadi Fakri Nazar, 18 years old. Samir Auni Aslan, 41 years old. On January 14, 2023, Yazan Samir Jabbari, 19 years old. Ahmed Adnan Khalani, 23 years old. Izzuddin Bassam Hamara, 24 years old. On January 15th, Ahmed Hassan Khalla, 45 years old. January 16th, 2023, Amro Khalid Al-Hamour, 14 years old. January 17th, Hamdi Shakir Abu Diya, 40 years old. So if we can just have a moment of silence. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're almost at the conclusion of our night. We're going to have a poem by Violette Hattar. Violette is an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement here in the Bay Area. She studied ethnic studies and Arabic and is currently working for the Middle East Children's Alliance. She is a Palestinian from Jaffa on her mother's side, and she honors the strength of the women that have come before her through her work as a means to speak with them, as a means to fight with them, as a means to crawl out from the silences they have been forced to swallow for generations.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me here and for having me be a part of this beautiful event. It's amazing that so many of y'all are here today, so thank you for being here. And it's really an honor to be here. You know, I was just seeing and hearing all of the names of our people that have been martyred just this year. So many of them are youth, and for us, you know, as Palestinians, I think a lot about when Ghassan Kanafani, was just thinking about this today, was asked a few days before he was assassinated what death means, if death means anything to him. And he was prepared to die. He knew that he was gonna be assassinated. And a lot of our youth right now, even in Dahisha, are carrying their wills in their pockets, expecting death. And Ghassan Kanafani, when he was asked this, said, of course, death has meaning. That for the Palestinians, for people who resist, this is the ultimate attachment to life, right? To our struggle. There is a meaning in death. Our martyrs, death does not end, their lives do not end with their death. They live on in our hearts, they live on in our struggle, they live on in our commitment to liberation and to freedom. And I butchered his words a little bit. He said it much better than I just said it. But this poem, I wrote when the night that Shireen Abu Akleh was martyred. And we heard about the news, and we're just trying to, process it. There was a couple of friends with me, and we started to listen to this song called Hilwe Chow, which is the Arabic version of Bella Chow. And it's a song for the resistance and for our martyrs. And it talks about the person who's singing says that the al-muqawim, the resistor, takes his hand because he has the feeling that he's going to become a martyr. And he becomes a martyr. And so he asks him to bury him with his hands and to bury him under the most beautiful flower. And this most beautiful flower is the flower of resistance that fell for the cause of freedom. So this poem was written there, and also while we were listening to this song came from that. I'm gonna need y'all's help today with singing it because I'm not usually the person who sings. So I need y'all's help. So you can say with me, حلوة ciao. Can y'all say حلوة? Ciao. حلوة ciao. حلوة ciao, حلوة ciao, حلوة ciao, ciao, ciao. Okay, so y'all are gonna sing that part with me, okay? عشروق الشمس صحيت من نومي يا حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو 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 عشروق الشمس صحيت من نومي وكان بيزحف العدو. The enemy lurks in every corner, waiting for the moment. Every moment is cruel and unforgiving. The enemy lurks everywhere, behind an army uniform or in a friend's eyes. There is no escape. Yet still, في كل مكان وراه. يا مقاوم خدني أنا وأنت سوية يا حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو 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 يا مقاوم خدني أنا وأنت سوية إحساسي إني حكون شاهد. Resistance is not a word, not a thought, not an idea. Resistance is an act of sacrifice. A sacrifice for freedom, not just your own, at risk of your own. Resistance is a sacrifice for freedom. Raised from a love for the land, a love for the people, a love stronger than any other love. Resistance is a long, deep, painful breath, yearning for freedom. Through the eye of a slingshot, a tunnel underground, or the barrel of a gun. سقطت شهيدا وأنا أقاوم يا حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو 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 سقطت شهيدا وأنا أقاوم يا رفيقي بإيدك ادفني. The occupier's bullet does not discriminate. A child hiding in his father's arms, a paramedic tending to the wounded, a blind mother of 6 at a checkpoint, youth defending their camp, a journalist known and loved by everyone with a satellite, a journalist with press across her chest in the camp of resistance. The occupier's bullet does not discriminate. Because we are all the same, a virus in their system. The harder they try to extinguish the fire, the larger it grows. بيدك تفني بي على الجبل يا حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو 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 بيدك تفني في على الجبل تحت الأجمل وردة. Held by warm hands, wrapped in the people's pride, carried through the streets and returned to the land. longing for the dirt of its village. The blood of our martyrs runs eternal, from highest mountain to lowest valley, from river to sea. رح كل البشر يمروا بحدي يا حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو 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 رح كل البشر يمروا بحدي يعطوني اسم أجمل وردة. Never resting, never at peace, our martyrs' blood is hot, boiling, blistering the earth into blazes of beautiful red, blossoming bloody into a fire that burns immortal inside each of us who refuses to forget. The land remembers too and builds their blood an eternal home in the bud of red poppies. Blooming in thousands, burning rage inside us, so we never concede, never relent, and never forget that resistance is an act of sacrifice, a love stronger than any other love. هاي الوردة وردة مقاوم يا حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو 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 هاي الوردة وردة مقاوم سقط من أجل الحرية هاي الوردة وردة مقاوم يا حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو حلوة تشاو 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 هاي الوردة وردة مقاوم سقط من أجل الحرية. Long after the sun falls and the blood dries, the poppy still grows, an endless bloom, a long, deep, unwavering breath, fighting for freedom. Glory to the resistance, glory to our martyrs, until complete return and total liberation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for blessing us with your voice and singing. I was not expecting that. Thank you. So I'm going to hand it off to Randa. We have one more thing before we close off at the end of the night. So Randa is going to introduce the next person.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Violet. That was beautiful. And just reflecting on our event so far with the amazing Noura and Dina in conversation, talking about death and mourning. What you both talked about today really made me realize, both Dina and what you were talking about kinship and our collective mourning practices as being strengthening. And Noura sharing that Ahmed's sister continued on with the wedding as an act of defiance, despite the deep grief and heartbreak the family were enduring. It really makes me reflect that while we're sitting here talking about death and martyrdom and the cruelty of Israel's practices against us, about settler colonialism, what we're really talking about is our affirmation for life and for believing that we do have a future and that we are going to be liberated. And we can only do that in our collectivity. So I want to thank you all again for being here with us and for really being part of these collective practices. Thank you, Lubna, for reading the names of the martyrs from just this year. And hopefully we can hold them and keep their memory alive and their lives and dreams and aspirations alive. So with that, we want to almost close our program. I would like to introduce Maika Khater, a member of the Palestine Feminist Collective, and also welcome her to California, to Berkeley. She is a professor at UC Berkeley in the African American Studies Department. And she's going to read a statement from Lina Abu Akleh, who has prepared it for us. Unfortunately, Lina could not be with us today. As you might know, Lina is the niece of Shireen Abu Akleh, the journalist who was executed last May on Nakba Day, while she was covering the siege on Jenin. I think we all might have seen the videos and the horrific ways that her funeral was attacked after that. And so Lina has been thrust into this world similarly to Noura in advocating for justice for her aunt. She's a human rights advocate in her own right, but now she has really been spearheading the campaign to demand justice and accountability for the killing of her aunt. So we would like to share her words. So please, Micah, thank you.
I am really honored to be reading these words, and I remind you that I am just holding space for Lina here, so as I use the I pronoun, the we pronoun, please think of Lina and her family. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of my family, I would like to first thank the Palestinian Feminist Collective for organizing this event and for shedding light on our dear Aunt Shireen and all the other martyrs. It's still surreal and difficult for me to say the word martyr. The word itself brings me back to May 11th, when her colleague broke the news to me while sobbing and screaming. Lina, Shireen istashhadet, martyred. I remember that phone call, that day, that week, and that entire month, like it was yesterday, because for me and my family, every day feels like May 11th. The grief, anger, sadness, and trauma that we as a family have had to endure and continue to endure is painful beyond words. We did not only lose a renowned journalist, but we lost our one and only aunt. My father lost his only sister. It's very difficult to put it in words to explain the suffering, but this is exactly what injustice feels like. The killing of Shireen could have been avoided if there was accountability for the countless crimes committed by the Israeli occupation army in the past, or for the numerous journalists who were targeted and killed. Shireen wasn't the first journalist, nor the last. Israel's assassination of Shireen falls into a long-standing and well-documented Israeli pattern of targeting and inciting against Palestinian journalists, and all journalists for that matter. As a family, we didn't have the opportunity nor the privilege to mourn because we had to shoulder the task of seeking justice and accountability. Our calls for justice and accountability is to ensure that no other journalist and no other family has to suffer what ours has. Eight months have passed, and the soldier that killed her and the system responsible haven't been held accountable yet. But we continue to pursue justice and accountability through any avenue open to us, because she would have done the same if it was any of us. Generations grew up to her voice and watching her report from every corner in Palestine. Young women and girls grew up aspiring to become journalists like Shireen because she shattered the gender norms and paved the way for many journalists. Every Saturday, my family and I visit Shireen's grave in the old city of Jerusalem. Every time we go, we find her grave covered in bouquets and pots of flowers, religious icons, incense, and lit candles. Despite how sad and unfortunate the circumstances are, this still shows that the people will never forget Shireen, and until this day, they continue to honor her and ask for justice. Therefore, as a family, we rely on all of you to ensure that Shireen's legacy and memory continues to be remembered. Continuing to speak truth to power and amplifying the stories and voices of Palestinians, just like Shireen's reports always did, means honoring her exceptional and everlasting legacy. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you, PFC, and to the amazing Noura, Erakat. I appreciate all your support in keeping Shireen's memory alive.
So when Shireen passed away, it was devastating for all of us. I think I was like in denial. I found out right before bedtime. I was like, no, that's not true. And like immediately started seeing things online that Shireen was a madrasa. Like Shireen كانت madrasa, she was a school. Because for many young people of Palestine, Shireen taught people how to be reporters. Shireen taught people how to talk for Palestine. Shireen was a school for all of us. And so we honor her memory, we honor her dreams, and we honor her life. So this concludes our program. I just wanted to say a few things. I want to appreciate all of you for attending tonight. Appreciate this space here at Mudbreakers Cafe. This cafe belongs to Hazem Bazian and Hatem Bazian. And for many that don't know, this space is pretty historical in our organizing movement. We used to hold so many events here back in the day, and it was kind of an honor and a privilege to bring it back here, especially now after COVID, after being absent from each other for so long. So we hope you guys continue to use this space too. Don't be afraid to talk to Hazem and let him know, hey, we want to rent this space out. And then support him, come buy your coffee. We also want to encourage people to follow along with the Palestinian Feminist Collective. We want you to join and sign on to our pledge, affirming that Palestine is a feminist issue. And you can find that on our website. You could also just Google it. And then we want you to plug into our event next month. Next month, we're honoring Valentine's Day. And so it'll be a virtual community gallery walkthrough and discussion. This is going to be online. So you can find more information, how to sign up, log on to the Zoom and everything. It'll be on February 21st at 4 p.m. I believe that's Pacific time, I don't know. So tonight we named this event Fields of Red Poppies, which we should have said in the beginning. Red poppies signifies and signals martyrs for us, and so this is why we called it that. We want you to come over here to this corner. There are some poppies that are already cut out and printed. Uplift the name of a martyr, uplift the name of a loved one, a family member, and stick it on this poster here. And then calendars are also for donation sale. It's $25, so you can Venmo the number there. Are we accepting cash? Yeah. We're accepting cash. And if you don't want to do that and you just want to use your credit card, you can also go onto our website. Sorry? Checks. Oh, checks too. Checks, yeah. So pick up a calendar on your way out. Post the poppy, and also share in some refreshments. We did bring dates here tonight. For those of you that don't know, dates is a food of memorial when we come to our funerals. We offer dates and black coffee, kahwa sada, and we don't offer anything else, but this is what we offer when people come to Azzi to come and pay their respects and condolences. So this is what we have tonight. A few light snacks as well, too. So thank you all for being here tonight. And we're all out. We're going to close out.